My father handed my life's work to my incompetent brother, Aaron, and his manipulative fiancée, Genesis, during Sunday dinner. He thought I'd beg to stay. Instead, I quietly packed my things, canceled my proprietary software license, and watched their empire crumble from a distance. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. I was sitting at the mahogany dining table, the one my mother had refinished by hand 3 months before she died, nursing a migraine that had been threatening to split my skull open since Tuesday. It wasn't just a headache. It was the physical manifestation of 14-hour days, 7 days a week for the last 6 years. My body was screaming for rest, but my father, William, had insisted on this mandatory family celebration. He wouldn't tell me what we were celebrating, only that my attendance was required if I wanted to remain in good standing with the family. That phrase, in good standing, should have been my first warning. It was corporate speak, cold and transactional, used by a man who had slowly ceased to be a father and had become merely the chairman of the board in my life. I looked across the table at my brother, Aaron. At 29, he still had the soft, unweathered look of someone who had never truly lost sleep over a payroll deadline. He was currently swirling a glass of expensive Cabernet, vintage, on the company card, no doubt, and whispering something into the ear of his fiancée, Genesis. Genesis giggled, a sharp, tinkling sound that grated against my nerves like sandpaper. She was 26, a brand ambiguity consultant, whatever that meant, and had been in Aaron's life for 6 months. In that short time, she had managed to alienate the warehouse manager, insult the head of HR, and somehow convince my father that the office decor was draining the team's aura. "Valentina, you haven't touched your steak," William said, his voice booming from the head of the table. He didn't look at me. He was busy cutting into his own meat with a precision that felt aggressive. "I'm not feeling well, Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I spent the last 3 nights at the distribution center fixing the routing error that the night shift manager caused. I'm just exhausted. "Exhaustion is a mindset," Genesis chimed in, smiling sweetly. "You really should try manifestation, Valentina. If you manifest energy, the universe provides." I gripped my fork tighter, my knuckles turning white. "Manifestation doesn't organize international freight logistics, Genesis. Hard work does." Now, William interrupted, raising a hand. "Let's not bicker. Tonight is a night of joy, a night of looking forward." He stood up, tapping his knife against his wine glass. The sound rang out, sharp and piercing, silencing the room. Even the air conditioning seemed to hum quieter in anticipation. "I have an announcement," William began, his chest puffing out. He looked at Aaron with a warmth I hadn't seen directed at me in a decade. "For 40 years, this company has been my life, but a man knows when it is time to pass the torch. I have been doing a lot of thinking lately about legacy, about the future, about the name on the building." My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. After 10 years of sacrifice, of skipping vacations, of ruining my own relationships because the business always came first, he was finally going to acknowledge it. He was finally going to name me CEO so he could retire to his lake house. I straightened my posture, ignoring the throbbing in my temples, ready to accept the responsibility I had effectively been carrying for years anyway. "It is traditional," William continued, his gaze sliding past me to rest solely on his son, "for the business to stay in the male line, to carry the name forward with strength." The room went cold. The blood drained from my face so fast I felt dizzy. "So," William announced, beaming, "I am proud to announce that effective the 1st of the month, I am stepping down as CEO. And taking my place, leading us into the next generation, will be my son, Aaron." Aaron stood up, feigning surprise, buttoning his suit jacket. Genesis clapped enthusiastically, looking around the room as if waiting for applause that never came. I sat frozen, I couldn't breathe. "Dad," I choked out. William looked at me then, but his eyes were hard. "Valentina, don't make a scene." "But, Aaron," I stammered, my voice trembling. "Aaron doesn't know the difference between a bill of lading and a packing slip. He hasn't come to a single quarterly review in 2 years. I've been running operati. Ons, sales, and finance since Mom died." "And you've done a fine job as an assistant," William said dismissively. "But you're a woman, Val, you're 34. You should be focusing on finding a husband, starting a family. Not stressing over trucks and unions. It's not a look that suits you. You look tired. Old." "I look tired because I'm doing his job and yours," I snapped, the volume of my voice rising. Genesis leaned forward, her expression dripping with faux sympathy. "See, this is exactly why a man is better suited for leadership. You're too emotional, Valentina. You're hysterical." "I am not hysterical." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I am the only reason this company isn't bankrupt. Who secured the Amazon contract? Me. Who renegotiated the fuel surcharges when oil spiked? Me. And you were paid a salary for it," William said coldly. "Don't act like a martyr. You were an employee." "I'm your daughter." "You're an employee who is becoming insubordinate," William countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low register. "In fact, Aaron and I have been discussing the restructuring. Genesis has some wonderful ideas about rebranding, making the company younger, fresher. And we all agree that your management style is outdated, rigid." Aaron cleared his throat, trying to look authoritative but just looking like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. "Yeah, Val, we think it's best if you step aside completely. We need a clean slate. No bad vibes." "You're firing me?" I asked, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "We're letting you go," William corrected. "Pack your things. You have until noon tomorrow to clear your office. I want your keys and your company laptop on my desk before you leave the building." I looked at them, my father, who I had worshipped, my brother, who I had protected, and this stranger, Genesis, who was smiling like the cat who got the cream. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was a visceral, physical blow that shattered the very foundation of my identity. "Fine," I whispered, the fight suddenly draining out of me, replaced by a cold, numbing clarity. "I'll go." "Good," William said, sitting back down and spearing a potato. "Now, Aaron, tell us about this yacht trip you're planning for the executive retreat." I turned and walked out of the dining room. As I reached the doorway, I heard Genesis whisper, loud enough for me to hear, "Finally, now we can really start making money." I walked to the front door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. The pain in my head was gone, replaced by a terrifying calmness. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. It was a death sentence for the family I thought I had. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of neon streetlights and blinding rain. I didn't cry. I think I was in shock. My mind was racing, replaying the scene at the dinner table over and over again, dissecting every glance, every word. Traditional, emotional, assistant. When I finally walked into my quiet, empty apartment, the silence hit me like a physical weight. I had bought this place 2 years ago, but I had barely spent any time in it. My life had been the office. My life had been the warehouse. My life had been fixing William's mistakes and covering for Aaron's incompetence. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking so badly I spilled half of it on the granite countertop. I stared at the puddle, watching the water drip over the edge, onto the floor. "Pack your things." He wanted me gone by noon. He wanted my laptop. He wanted my keys. A dark, bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. It started low and then erupted into something frantic, echoing off the minimalist walls. They wanted a clean slate. They wanted to remove the rigid oversight that was holding them back. I walked into my home office, the one room in the apartment that actually looked lived in, and sat down at my personal desktop computer. It was a high-powered machine, one I used for gaming on the rare occasions I had free time, but mostly for coding. Coding was my secret solace. It was logic, it was structure, it was fair. If the code was right, it worked. If it was wrong, it broke. There was no nepotism in C++. I booted up the system, the hum of the cooling fans sounding like a jet engine in the silent room. I navigated to the cloud server where I hosted my personal projects. William and Aaron thought the company ran on magic. They thought the trucks just knew where to go, that the fuel efficiency reports generated themselves, that the client billing was automated by some standard industry tool we paid a subscription for. They were wrong. 5 years ago, the company was bleeding money. We were using outdated spreadsheets and whiteboards. We were losing packages, missing delivery windows, and hemorrhaging fuel costs. We couldn't afford the multi-million-dollar enterprise resource planning software the big logistics firms used, so I built one. I spent 6 months of sleepless nights teaching myself Python and SQL, building a custom, proprietary system I called Velocity. It handled everything: dynamic routing based on traffic and weather, automated invoicing, driver compliance tracking, and predictive maintenance scheduling. But because the company was broke at the time, and because I was smart enough to listen to my mother's old advice about protecting myself, I never sold the software to the company. I never transferred the IP rights. I retained full ownership of the code and the server it ran on. I had leased it to the company for $1 a month, a formality, a token agreement to make it legal. I opened the digital contract folder. There it was. License agreement, revocable at will by the licensor with 24 hours notice. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. They wanted my company laptop. They could have it. It was just a shell. The brain of the operation, the nervous system that kept the entire fleet moving, lived here on my private server under my name. I wasn't just the operations director. I was the architect of their entire reality. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I whispered to the empty room, my finger hovering over the mouse. You can fire the driver, but you can't fire the engine. I didn't click the terminate button yet. Not tonight. I needed to do this by the book. I needed to pack my office, hand over my keys, and look them in the eye one last time. I wanted them to feel the victory. I wanted them to feel safe. Then, when the sun went down and the trucks were loaded for the Monday night long-haul routes, I would pull the plug. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Genesis. "Hey Val, just wanted to say, don't take it personally. We really think this is for the best. Maybe you can take some time to find yourself. We're going to need your parking spot for my new Tesla, by the way. Zoxa." I read the message twice, then I deleted it. Find myself? Oh, I was about to find myself, all right. And they were about to find out exactly what happens when you throw the captain overboard in the middle of a storm. To understand why the betrayal cut so deep, you have to understand the dark days. That's what the long-term employees called the period 5 years ago, right after my mother passed away. William fell apart. He stopped coming in. He stopped caring. He spent his days at the country club and his nights drinking expensive scotch, ignoring the mounting piles of debt notices on his desk. Aaron was 24 then, fresh out of a university program he had barely passed, thanks to significant donations from Dad. He wasn't interested in logistics. He was interested in the image of being a businessman. He bought a flashy car on the company lease, hired his frat brothers as consultants, and tried to pivot the business into luxury courier services for high-end fashion brands. It was a disaster. We lost 3 of our core industrial contracts because Aaron forgot to renew the hazardous material certifications. The drivers were revolting because payroll was bouncing. The bank was threatening foreclosure on the main warehouse. I was 29. I had just been offered a lucrative position at a major tech firm in Seattle. I was ready to leave. I was ready to start my own life. But I couldn't let my father's legacy die. I couldn't let the 50 families who relied on us for paychecks lose their livelihoods. So, I turned down the job in Seattle. I moved back into my childhood bedroom to save rent money. I fired Aaron's friends. I liquidated my own 401k to cover payroll for 2 months while I renegotiated our debt with the bank. I saved them. I clawed the company back from the brink of death, inch by inch, dollar by dollar. I built Velocity during that time because we had no other choice. We needed efficiency to survive. William eventually came back to work, claiming credit for the turnaround, saying he had steered the ship through rough waters. I let him say it. I didn't care about the credit. I cared that the company was safe. And now, here was Genesis. I had met her 6 months ago when Aaron brought her to the office to shadow him. She wasn't a logistics expert. She wasn't a business consultant. Her LinkedIn profile listed her as a holistic brand architect and influencer. Her Instagram was full of photos of her posing in bikinis on beaches, holding products she was paid to promote. From day one, she looked at me with disdain. I wore sensible pantsuits and kept my hair in a bun. I wore little makeup. To her, I was invisible. I was the help. "Your office has terrible feng shui," she had told me the first time we met, wrinkling her nose at my stacks of shipping manifests. "It's blocking your abundance." "My abundance comes from the profit margins I generate," I had replied dryly. She had narrowed her eyes at me then, a look of pure, calculating malice that vanished the second Aaron walked into the room, replaced by a doe-eyed, helpless expression. "Babe, your sister is being so intense," she had whined, clinging to Aaron's arm. I was just trying to help. Over the last few months, I had watched her slowly isolate Aaron. She convinced him that the warehouse manager didn't respect him. She convinced him that he deserved a higher salary despite doing less work. And slowly, insidiously, she had started working on William. She flattered him. She called him a visionary. She told him that the company needed a young, masculine energy to compete in the modern world. She played into his insecurities about aging and his archaic views on gender roles. She was the architect of my exile, I knew it. Aaron was the weapon, blunt and dull, but she was the hand aiming him. The morning after the dinner, I arrived at the office at 8:00 a.m. sharp. The security guard, Mike, tipped his hat to me. "Morning, Miss Valentina. Heavy rain coming in tonight," he said. "It certainly is, Mike," I said, a sadness in my chest. Mike had 3 kids. If Aaron and Genesis tanked the company, Mike would be out of a job. I walked into my office. It was already different. My nameplate had been removed from the door. Inside, Genesis was sitting at my desk. My desk. She was spinning in my ergonomic chair, holding a tape measure. "Oh, hey," she said, not bothering to get up. "I'm just measuring for the new chaise lounge. We're going to turn this into a relaxation pod for Aaron. He needs a space to decompress." "Get out of my chair," I said, my voice low. "Technically, it's company property," she smirked, "and as of noon, you're trespassing." "It's 8:15, Genesis. I have 4 hours, get up." She rolled her eyes but stood up, smoothing down her designer skirt. "Fine, but hurry up. The painters are coming at 1. We're going with tranquil beige." "Where is William?" I asked, refusing to call him Dad. "He's at the lawyer's office," she said, examining her nails. "Transferring the shares to Aaron. It's a big day. We're ordering champagne for lunch. You probably shouldn't stay for that. It might be awkward." She walked to the door, then paused, turning back with a predatory grin. "You know, Val, you should thank me. You were drowning here. You were never going to be the face of this company. You just don't have the sparkle." "Sparkle doesn't pay the bills, Genesis," I said, opening a cardboard box and starting to put my framed degree into it. "That's where you're wrong," she laughed. "Perception is reality, and the reality is you're out and we're in." She left, her heels clicking down the hallway. I looked around the office. I didn't pack much, just my degree, a photo of my mother and my favorite mug. I left the files. I left the binders. I left the operational manuals I had written. They wouldn't read them anyway. At 11:55 a.m., I walked down to the server room in the basement. I had one last physical task to complete. While the software lived in the cloud, the local handshake protocol, the thing that allowed the office computers to talk to the cloud, was installed on a dedicated localized server rack. I didn't destroy it. I wasn't a vandal. I simply logged into the admin console, disabled the auto-renew feature for the Velocity license key, and set the expiration parameter to strictly follow the contract. Midnight tonight. Then, I placed my keys on top of the server rack. I walked out the back exit, avoiding the main lobby where I could hear corks popping. I got into my car, turned off my company phone, and left it on the passenger seat. I drove away. They wanted a fresh start. They were about to get a hard reset. The clock on my computer screen clicked from 11:59 p.m. to 12:00 a.m. Monday had officially begun. I sat in the dark of my home office, illuminated only by the soft blue glow of my server's dashboard. On the screen, a cascade of status indicators began to flicker. One by one, the connection nodes to the Miller Logistics on-site server turned from green to red. Client authorization failed. Route optimization protocol suspended. Driver manifest sync disconnected. It wasn't a crash. It was a scheduled cessation of services. My software, Velocity, the brain that told 58 trucks where to go, what to load, and when to sleep, had simply stopped talking to the body. I didn't feel the surge of malicious glee I thought I might. Instead, I felt a heavy, cold resolve. It was like watching a patient flatline after you've been forced to pull the plug against your will. I took a sip of herbal tea, the warmth spreading through my chest, grounding me. "Goodbye, Miller Logistics," I whispered. I didn't go to sleep immediately. Instead, I opened a new browser window and began to type. If I was going to war, I needed armor. I drafted an email to Sarah, an old college roommate who is now a ruthless intellectual property attorney in Chicago. I attached the original licensing agreement, the metadata proving the code's creation date on my personal machine, and the termination notice I had legally queued in the system. Subject: potential IP theft, unauthorized use of Velocity. Sarah, I was terminated today. My family is retaining the hardware, but as you know, the software license was month to month. I've revoked access. I anticipate they will attempt to bypass the lock or claim ownership. I need a cease and desist drafted and ready to fly by morning. Also, looking into Genesis Thorne, she's the new consultant. Something feels off. I hit send. The first text message arrived at 3:17 a.m. It was from the night shift dispatcher, a good man named Elias. "Miss Val, the screens just went black, all of them. Drivers are radioing in, they can't access their digital manifests. The tablets are bricked. Is this an update?" I stared at the phone. I wanted to reply. I wanted to tell Elias how to switch to manual, how to pull the hard copies from the filing cabinet in the back office. But I couldn't. Helping them now would imply I was still an employee. It would imply liability. I swiped the notification away and put the phone on Do Not Disturb. By 7:00 a.m., my phone screen was a wall of missed calls. 14 from William, 22 from Aaron, 3 from a number I didn't recognize, presumably Genesis. I made myself a full breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh coffee. I sat by the window and watched the rain lash against the glass. For 10 years, my Mondays had been a race against time, a blur of cortisol and caffeine. Today, the silence was deafening, but it was mine. At 8:30 a.m., I finally picked up the phone. I didn't call William. I called the State Department of Transportation. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady. "This is Valentina Miller. I'm calling to update the registered safety officer for Miller Logistics, dot number 894,420. "Certainly, ma'am, go ahead. I am formally resigning as the Hazardous Materials Safety Director and Compliance Officer, effective immediately. Please remove my certification from the company's operating authority." "Understood." Just so you know, without a certified officer on file, the carrier's hazmat permit is automatically suspended within 24 hours. I am aware, I said. Please notify the carrier. I hung up. That was the second trap. The software was the brain, the hazmat certification was the blood. Without me, they couldn't just move boxes slowly. They legally couldn't move their 3 biggest clients' freight at all. I was no longer the victim. I was the siege commander. The pounding on my apartment door started at 9:15 a.m. It was aggressive, rhythmic, and desperate. Valentina, open this door, I know you're in there. It was Aaron. I took a deep breath, smoothed my shirt, and walked to the door. I didn't open it immediately. I checked the peephole. Aaron was there, red-faced, his hair wet from the rain, still wearing the suit from yesterday's dinner. Behind him stood William, looking pale and confused, holding a black umbrella. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just wide enough to be heard, but not wide enough to invite them in. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. "You hacked us," Aaron screamed, pushing his hand against the door frame. "You wiped the servers, everything is gone, the trucks are sitting in the yard. Amazon is calling Dad's personal cell." "I didn't hack anything," I said, leaning against the door jamb. "And nothing is wiped, the data is safe." "Then turn it back on," William shouted, stepping forward. He looked older than he had the night before. The arrogance was replaced by a frantic, sweating panic. "Fix it, Valentina. Now, this little temper tantrum is costing us thousands by the hour." "I can't fix it," I said. "I don't work for Miller Logistics. Remember, I was fired. I was told to pack my things." "Don't play games with me," William roared, his voice cracking. "You sabotaged company property before you left. That's criminal. I'll have you arrested." "It's not company property," I said, my voice dropping to a steely chill. "The computers are yours, the trucks are yours, but the software, Velak IT, that belongs to me." Aaron blinked, looking at William, then back at me. "What? No, it's on our servers." "It's on your servers under a licensing agreement," I corrected him. "An agreement that I signed as the developer and you signed as the CEO 5 years ago, Dad. You probably didn't read it. You were too busy at the country club. It was a monthly license, revocable at will." I saw the memory flicker in William's eyes. The vague recollection of signing a stack of papers I had put in front of him during the dark days, just happy that the problems were going away. You charged us," William stammered. $1 a month," I said. "And since I am no longer employed, and since you decided to go in a fresh direction, I decided to terminate T." Vendor relationship. You wanted a clean slate, you got it. All my rigid oversight is gone." "You have to turn it back on," Aaron pleaded, his voice losing its edge and becoming whiny. "Genesis is freaking out. She tried to install QuickBooks, but it doesn't do routing. The drivers are threatening to walk. We don't know who is carrying what." "That sounds like a CEO problem, Aaron," I said. "Genesis is a brand architect, right? Maybe she can manifest a solution." "Valentina, please," William said, his tone shifting from anger to a desperate, manipulative softness. "We're family. You can't let the legacy die like this. Just come in. Turn it on. We can discuss a consulting fee." "A consulting fee?" I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Yesterday I was insubordinate and outdated. Today you want to hire me." "We need the system," William insisted. "The system is not for sale," I said firmly. "And neither am I. You made it very clear that my services were no longer required. You wanted Aaron to lead. Let him lead." "You're killing the company," Aaron shouted. "No, Aaron," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I was the life support. You just unplugged the machine because you didn't like the beeping noise." I started to close the door. "Wait," William yelled, jamming his umbrella tip into the gap. "The hazmat loads. The DOT sent us a suspension notice. They said the safety officer resigned. We have 6 tankers of industrial solvent sitting in the bay." "I am personally liable for those loads," I said. "My signature is on the compliance forms. Do you think I'm going to risk my license and jail time for a company I'm not allowed to enter? You need a certified officer. I suggest you get certified. It takes about 6 months of classes. 6 months, William turned white. We have 6 hours before the client voids the contract. Then you better start driving, I said. Oh wait, you don't have a CDL either. I kicked the umbrella tip out of the door jamb and slammed the door shut. I locked the deadbolt. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, listening to Aaron cursing and kicking the door from the outside. My heart was racing, but not from fear. It was the adrenaline of finally, after 34 years, saying no. By Wednesday, the collapse of Miller Logistics was no longer a private family dispute. It was industry gossip. I sat in Sarah's downtown office, looking at the cease and desist letter she had just finalized. The high-rise view of the city was gray and rainy, matching the mood of the voicemails accumulating on my phone. They tried to hire a third-party IT firm yesterday, Sarah said, sliding a report across her glass desk. My sources say the firm walked out after 2 hours. Apparently, without your source code and the database schema, the raw data on their servers is just gibberish. It's encrypted. I encrypted it for client privacy, I said, sipping my water. Standard protocol. Well, to them, it looks like ransomware, Sarah smirked. Genesis is telling people you're a cyber terrorist. Let her talk, I said. What did you find on her? Sarah opened a manila folder. Genesis Thorne. Real name, Jennifer Thornley. Failed real estate agent in Florida. Sued twice for fraud in connection with a luxury lifestyle coaching scam. She has no degree in marketing, branding, or business. She met Aaron at a nightclub in Miami 6 months ago. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. She's a grifter. A professional one, Sarah confirmed. She targets small family businesses with weak leadership. She comes in, inflates the ego of the heir, alienates the competent staff, and tries to pivot the business into high-margin ventures that are actually just shell companies she controls. I checked the vendor list Aaron approved on Monday. She pointed to a line item. Thorne Global Consulting Retainer, $25,000. They paid her $25,000 on the first day, I asked, incredulous. And another $50,000 for rebranding assets, Sarah added. They are draining the operating capital, Valentina, fast. My phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Elias, the dispatcher. It was a photo of the main warehouse floor. It was chaos. Pallets were stacked haphazardly in the aisles. Drivers were standing in a group, arms crossed, looking angry. In the background, I could see Aaron standing on a crate, shouting something, while Genesis filmed him with her phone. The caption read, "He's trying to use Google Maps on his phone to route the fleet. 3 drivers just quit. Amazon rep is here. It's over." I felt a pang of guilt. These were my people. Elias, the drivers, the warehouse crew, they didn't deserve this. They're going to crash it into the ground by Friday, I said quietly. That's the plan, Sarah said. Grifters like Genesis don't build, they strip mine. She'll take the cash, blame the failure on your sabotage, and move on to the next mark. Unless. Unless what? Unless we expose her, Sarah said. But to do that, you need to get William to listen. And right now, he thinks you're the villain. He won't listen to me, I said. He's too proud. He might listen to the bank, Sarah suggested, or the clients. Just then, my phone rang again. It wasn't William or Aaron. It was Mr. Henderson, the regional VP of logistics for Amazon, our biggest client. I looked at Sarah, she nodded. Answer it. Hello, Mr. Henderson, I said, putting it on speaker. Valentina, his voice was clipped and professional, but I could hear the tension. I'm standing in your father's office. He's telling me some story about a server migration and Russian hackers. But my doc manager tells me your signature isn't on the latest hazmat manifests. And frankly, Aaron just tried to explain our SLA to me, and he clearly has no idea what he's talking about. Where are you? I'm no longer with the company, Mr. Henderson. I was let go on Sunday. There was a long silence on the other end. Let go. You're the only reason we renewed the contract last year. I appreciate that, sir, but the new management decided to go in a different direction. The direction they are going is off a cliff, Henderson said bluntly. I have freight sitting on your docks that needs to be in Ohio by tomorrow morning. If it doesn't move, I'm voiding the contract for breach of performance. I'm pulling the exclusivity clause. I heard William's voice in the background, muffled and frantic. Mr. Henderson, please, it's just a technical glitch. It's not a glitch, William, Henderson barked away from the phone. Then he came back to me. Valentina, if I pull this contract, Miller Logistics is insolvent, you know that. I know, I said. Is there any way to fix this? He asked. If you were, reinstated. I looked at Sarah. She was writing something on a notepad. Control. Mr. Henderson, I said slowly, I can fix the routing in 10 minutes. I can recertify the loads immediately, but I can't do that as a former employee, and I won't do it for the current management. I see, Henderson said, his voice lowered. There is a clause in our vendor agreement regarding key person insurance. You are listed as a key person. If you are removed without our prior notification, we can freeze payments. I didn't know that, I lied. I knew every clause, I wrote them. I'm going to freeze the payments, Henderson said. That should get their attention. I'm giving them 24 hours to resolve this. If you aren't back in charge by tomorrow noon, I'm sending in my own trucks to recover our freight, and I'm suing for damages. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Don't thank me, Valentina. Fix it. I don't like dealing with amateurs. He hung up. I looked at Sarah. The payments are frozen, they have no cash flow. And they just paid Genesis $75,000, Sarah noted. Checks are going to bounce on Friday. Payroll is going to bounce. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed clean and gray. Tomorrow is the annual Driver Appreciation Barbecue, I said, remembering the schedule. William never misses it. He loves to play the benevolent patriarch, handing out burgers to the men. It's the perfect stage, Sarah said. Public, all the employees, the family. And Genesis will be there, I said, a plan forming in my mind. She loves an audience. I'll have the dossier on her fully compiled by then, Sarah said. Bank records, past aliases, the mugshots from Florida. Print it out, I said, turning back to her. All of it, make copies. What are you going to do? I'm going to the barbecue, I said, and I'm bringing the potato salad, and the truth. The stakes couldn't be higher. If I failed, the company died, and 50 families lost their income. If I succeeded, I would have to break my father's heart to save his legacy. But looking at the photo of the chaos in the warehouse, I knew I had no choice. The fresh start was over. It was time for the cleanup. The annual Driver Appreciation Barbecue was held in the gravel lot behind the main distribution center. Usually, it was a joyous event. The smell of slow-smoked brisket, the sound of classic rock blaring from speakers, and my father shaking hands with men he had known for 20 years. Today, however, the atmosphere was more like a wake than a celebration. I pulled my car up to the security gate. Mike, the guard, looked at me with relief washing over his tired face. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't ask if I was on the list. He just hit the button to raise the barrier and gave me a sharp, respectful nod. Give him hell, Miss Valentina, he muttered as I drove past. I parked my sedan next to Aaron's obnoxious new sports car. I grabbed the thick manila envelope from the passenger seat, the weapon Sarah had forged for me, and stepped out. The air smelled of burnt charcoal and tension. Walking toward the crowd, I saw them, the drive. RS were huddled in tight groups, whispering, their arms crossed defensively. The warehouse staff looked sullen. And there, on a makeshift stage made of pallets, stood William, Aaron, and Genesis. Genesis was wearing a white designer dress that cost more than most of these men made in a month. She was holding a microphone, her voice shrill and amplified, echoing off the corrugated metal walls of the warehouse. And we know there have been some hiccups with the new digital transition, she was saying, flashing a bright, fake smile. But change is messy. That's just the universe clearing out the old energy to make room for abundance. We have big plans for a mindfulness lounge in the break room. We don't need a lounge, we need our root sheets, a driver shouted from the back. And our overtime pay, another yelled. William stepped forward, taking the mic from Genesis. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken. He was trying to project strength, but he looked like a captain whose ship was already underwater. "Now, boys, settle down," William said, his voice shaking slightly. "We are working on the technical issues. It's a complex migration. We've been targeted by external bad actors, but we are a family here, and families stick together through the hard times." "We aren't family if the checks bounce, William." Old Man Miller, no relation, our longest-tenured driver, barked. "The checks won't bounce," Aaron shouted, stepping up. "We have plenty of capital. My father built this company from nothing." "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the sudden silence of the gravel lot, "Mom built the books. I built the systems. You just built a mountain of debt in 3 days." The crowd parted like the Red Sea as I walked toward the stage. I didn't shout. I didn't run. I walked with the steady, rhythmic cadence of a woman who had walked these floors for a decade. "Valentina," William gasped, the microphone dropping to his side. "What are you doing here?" "She's trespassing," Genesis shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Security, Mike, get her out of here. She's the one who hacked us. She's the toxic energy." Mike, standing by the gate, crossed his arms and looked at the sky, suddenly very interested in a passing cloud. I stopped at the base of the pallet stage. I looked up at them, the triumvirate of incompetence. "I didn't hack anything, Genesis," I said, loud enough for every driver to hear. "I just took back what was mine. Velocity is my intellectual property, and since I was fired, I took it with me. That's business." "You're holding the company hostage," Aaron yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. "No, Aaron, I'm stopping you from driving it off a cliff." I climbed the stairs onto the stage. Genesis tried to block me, but I stepped around her as if she were a traffic cone. I turned to the crowd. "How many of you have received your direct deposit notifications for tomorrow?" Silence. "That's what I thought," I said. "And you won't. Because as of 20 minutes ago, Amazon, our largest client, froze all vendor payments to Miller Logistics due to breach of contract." A gasp went through the crowd. The rumble of anger grew louder. "That's a lie," William shouted, grabbing my arm. "Mr. Henderson wouldn't do that." "He did," I said, shaking him off gently. "Because you don't have a hazmat officer, because your trucks are sitting idle, and because he knows the ship is sinking." I turned to Genesis. She was looking for an exit, her eyes darting around the hostile crowd. "And as for the capital Aaron mentioned," I continued, opening the manila envelope, "it's gone." I pulled out the bank statement Sarah had flagged. In the last 72 hours, 3 transfers totaling $75,000 were made to Thorn Global Consulting for branding services. Services that consist of a few Canva logos and a plan to paint the break room beige. "That's standard industry rates," Genesis cried, her voice cracking. "I am a high-level consultant." "Really?" I pulled out the next sheet. A mugshot. It was Genesis, but with darker hair and less makeup, holding a placard that said PINELLAS County Sheriff. "This is Jennifer Thornley," I read aloud. "Arrested 2 years ago in Florida for wire fraud and operating a Ponzi scheme disguised as a life coaching academy. She pled down to a misdemeanor and probation. She's not a consultant, Dad. She's a predator. And she found the perfect prey." William stared at the photo. He looked at Genesis, then at the photo again. The resemblance was undeniable. "Jennifer," William whispered, "is this true?" Jennifer dropped the act. Her face contorted into a sneer, the love and light mask shattering completely. "Oh, grow up, old man," she spat. "You were begging to be fleeced. I want a legacy. I want a son to take over. You were so desperate to sideline your boring, workaholic daughter that you let me wah." LK right in the front door. I didn't steal anything. You signed the checks. You and your idiot son. Aaron looked like he had been punched in the gut. Babe, but we're getting married. We were getting married because you had a company, she laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. Now you have a parking lot full of angry truckers and a frozen bank account. I'm out. The lease on the Porsche is in your name, by the way. She turned to leave, but the crowd of drivers had tightened their circle. She looked at the wall of flannel and denim, then back at me. Let her go, I said calmly. She's not worth the jail time, boys. The police are already waiting at her apartment. The drivers parted just enough to let her scurry through, her high heels wobbling in the gravel. She disappeared toward the gate, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and ruined dreams. Silence descended on the stage. Aaron sat down on a stack of pallets, his head in his hands, weeping. Not a dignified cry, but the sobbing of a child who had broken a toy he couldn't fix. William stood frozen. He looked at the drivers, who were staring at him with a mix of pity and contempt. He looked at the empty spot where Genesis had stood. And then, finally, he looked at me. He looked old, defeated. The arrogance of the Sunday dinner was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization of his own foolishness. Valentina, he croaked, the payroll, the Amazon contract, is it really over? The contract is void at midnight, I said. The payroll runs at 5:00 p.m. today. If the system isn't up, the bank won't process the batch. He looked at his watch. It was 2:00 p.m. I can't fix it, he whispered. I don't know how. I know, I said. He took a step toward me, his hands trembling. Val, I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I let tradition. He couldn't finish the sentence. Tears welled up in his eyes. Save us, please, for your mother's sake. I looked at him. I could have walked away. I could have let it burn. It would have been justice. But looking at the faces of the drivers, men like Miller, who had taught me how to drive a stick shift, men who had brought casseroles when Mom died, I knew I couldn't punish them for my father's sins. I will save it, I said, my voice hard and absolute. But not for you, and not as an employee. Anything, William said. Name it. 51%, I said. Controlling interest. I become CEO effective immediately. You retire officially. No board seat, no veto power. You go to the lake house and you stay there. William nodded, a tear tracking through the dust on his cheek. Done. And Aaron, I said, looking down at my brother. He looked up, eyes red. Val, I'm sorry, she manipulated me. She did, I agreed. But you let her. You wanted the title without the work. So, if you want to stay in this family business, you're going to learn it, from the bottom. What do you mean? Aaron sniffled. I pointed to the warehouse bay. You start on the loading dock tomorrow. Shift starts at 4:00 a.m. You answer to the shift manager. If you're late once, you're fired. If you complain once, you're fired. Aaron looked at the warehouse, then at his soft, uncalloused hands. He nodded slowly. Okay. I turned back to the crowd of drivers. They were watching, waiting. Mike, I shouted to the security guard, open the main server room. I sat down on the edge of the stage, opened my laptop, and connected to the local Wi-Fi. The crowd held its breath. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I accessed the remote admin panel. I entered my encryption key. I typed in the command I had written 3 days ago. RE initialize system. VLOCAT restore license. Permanent sync HAZMAT certificates. V Miller active. I hit enter. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a low hum began to emanate from the building behind us. The warehouse lights flickered and steadied. And then, a sound like a wave crashing. 50 cell phones pinged simultaneously. I got a route, a driver shouted, looking at his phone. Payroll just hit pending, another yelled. We're live, someone cheered. The tension broke. The drivers started clapping, a roar of applause that drowned out the hum of the servers. They weren't clapping for the company, they were clapping for the engine. I closed my laptop. I didn't smile. I just stood up, looked at my father one last time, and walked down the steps. I had a company to run. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life, but also the most satisfying. Cleaning up the mess Genesis left took weeks. We had to claw back the fraudulent payments through legal action, reassure our clients, and rebuild the morale of a workforce that had been treated like disposable cogs. William kept his word. He signed the transfer papers the next morning. It was a somber affair in the lawyer's office. He didn't try to negotiate. He didn't try to justify himself. He just signed his name, handed me the pen, and looked out the window. "Your mother always said you were the smart one," he said softly, staring at the city skyline. I was just too stubborn to see that smart didn't have a gender.